In late 15th century Europe, at a time when the Renaissance was in full swing, Leonardo da Vinci painted what would become one of the most iconic and easily recognizable images of all time: the Last Supper. Displayed in many homes and churches around the world, the Last Supper depicts Jesus of Nazareth dining with his 12 apostles shortly before he was arrested and crucified by the Romans. It shows Jesus and the apostles, who were all Jewish and lived 1,500 years before Da Vinci, wearing colorful Roman togas in Renaissance style and very European features, including fair skin and lighter shades of hair. Nowadays, it seems painfully obvious that these features don't likely resemble the historical Jewish people in the slightest. To be fair, Da Vinci probably didn't concern himself too much with the historical accuracy of the image, and was more interested in capturing the emotional landscape of the scene. In other words, the depiction of Jesus and the apostles on the scene was, most assuredly, his own artistic interpretation. Da Vinci wasn't alone in depicting Jesus, and historical Jews for that matter, according to how they see and interpret biblical stories. From El Greco to Rembrandt, then from Salman in the mid-20th century to even the most recent Christian artwork you've probably seen in a pamphlet somewhere, Jesus and almost all biblical characters were depicted as European-looking, despite the very obvious fact that they were Jewish. This isn't even limited to paintings and traditional forms of media. Even the movies and documentaries usually depict Jesus, and most biblical figures, as you guessed it, white. But why is this the case when nobody knew what he actually looked like? Like Da Vinci, it was more or less an artistic interpretation. Artists draw inspiration from the world around them. There were no actual portraits of Jesus made when he was alive. In the earliest days of Christianity, creating portraits out of people was considered idolatry, so portraits depicting Jesus were strictly forbidden. It was only centuries later that portraits were created, and hence, artists were left to their own devices. Well, more or less. While they weren't limited by historicity and had more leeway in their interpretations, artists back in the day still had to play by the rules of the ruling elite. In Da Vinci's case, he had the Roman Catholic Church to answer to. With that in mind, it made sense that the people in the Last Supper would look more like Europeans when the Catholic Church took hold. Add to that the fact that he lived during the Renaissance, a time of renewed interest in classical antiquity, and you have a pale-skinned Jesus with long, flowing brown hair. Interestingly, this wasn't unique to Europeans. Christian churches around the world sure did put a spin on their own interpretation of Jesus, and everyone from the Bible. From Ethiopia to even China, devotees made their own interpretation of biblical characters, whom they based, wait for it, on themselves. Why the white Jesus and apostles stuck, though, was another matter. To put it simply, European expansion and colonialism brought their imagery around the world. Living under European domination for centuries, the image of Jesus as a white male in his early 30s became the standard, despite the fact that it's most certainly not accurate. So if Jesus wasn't white, what race was he? These were difficult questions to answer. Nobody knew what he looked like. Even the Bible gave very few details on his appearance, let alone his race. However, Mary, his mother, was said to have come from Galilee, so he was most certainly Jewish. His apostles were all said to be Jewish as well. Without question, so were most venerated biblical figures in the Gospels and the Old Testament. Now here lies the problem. Most people will tell you that Jews aren't a race. Rather, it can be more accurately called an ethno-religious group with a shared heritage and ancestry, which is 100% true. In fact, Jews include individuals from various origins and physical appearance. Traditionally, they identify themselves as the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Later renamed as Israel, Jacob was the progenitor of what would become the 12 tribes of Israel. also known as the Israelites. Historically, Jews were a group of Semitic-speaking people in the Levant region during the Iron Age. They were believed to have inhabited a part of Canaan. With all these sorts of contradictions in play, one might ask, what did the ancient Israelites actually look like? Were they white? Or where are they not? And if they weren't, how did they become white? The complex history of Jews. Pegging Jews into one race is an almost impossible task, even in today's modern era. You see, the definition of the word itself makes it so. Jewish culture, community, heritage, religion, and ethnicity are interconnected. It's also worth noting that not everyone who identifies themselves as Jewish practice Judaism, and anyone who isn't of Jewish ethnicity is welcome to convert to Judaism. But let's put that aside. Who were the Jews of the biblical times, aka the ancient Israelites? Now, this makes the problem even more complicated. As you remember in our discussion earlier, there's a considerable lack of portraits concerning Jesus and other biblical figures when Christianity first started. There are plenty of reasons this happened. The most important, perhaps, there was the rampant aniconism in Judaism. Simply put, aniconism is a religious or cultural practice that prohibits the creation and use of images relating to divine figures, people, and even living creatures. Take note that not every Jewish community prohibits images, but it was also highly discouraged. In the Ten Commandments, creating idols was strictly forbidden, as stated in the Second Commandment. Idolatry was a grievous sin, and crafting any kind of imagery was sometimes interpreted as a violation of that rule.
Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, nor any manner of likeness, of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down unto them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto the 1,000th generation of them that love me and keep my commandments.
Exodus 20:3-6. The early Christians adopted this, and as such prohibited the creation of images, even if that was to illustrate the story of Jesus. However, as Christianity began to adapt and syncretize with other pagan religions, this ban was slowly lifted for the new religion. But not Judaism. The aniconism has generally stayed with Judaism to this day, with some Jewish communities adopting this avoidance of divine and human image representations. Aniconism is one of the main reasons there are scant portrayals of the early Israelites. Add to that the centuries of plight the Israelites suffered under countless invasions and wars. Any work they might have created was likely destroyed and plundered. Fortunately, there were a few surviving images created by the early Jews. One of the best examples was this fresco from Dura Europos Synagogue in Syria, which shows the Jews as they fled Egypt and were being chased by the Pharaoh. As you can see in this fresco, the Jews were depicted as having dark skin and wearing tunics and cloaks typical of the Near East during the 3rd century CE. It's perhaps one of the earliest artworks depicting biblical scenes, and of course, one of the first frescoes showing ancient Israelites. Could this be the evidence we're looking for that portrays what the early Israelites looked like? Not so much, unfortunately. Being painted a few centuries after Christ, this fresco was likely a stylized representation rather than a historically accurate one, similar to how Da Vinci and other artists might have treated the subject. Back in ancient times, artists were more concerned with delivering the religious message with maximum impact rather than detailed physical realism. We can assume that not only the artists draw inspiration from around them, their appearance and garments, but also followed the artistic conventions of the day. In addition to that, the availability of materials was much lesser than in Da Vinci's time, so they probably only worked with what they had. Most importantly, this fresco was created around the 3rd century CE, about 1,500 years after the 12 tribes of Israel was said to have been founded. Still, this doesn't conclusively prove that the ancient Israelites didn't look like the one in the frescoes. In fact, this tangible fresco that exists to this day opens up many possibilities as to what the ancient Israelites actually looked like. Located in the Middle East, Syria sits on the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, within the cradle of civilization, Fertile Crescent. While Syria wasn't technically part of the ancient Kingdom of Israel, the broader region, including parts of Syria, was historically and culturally connected to the narratives and peoples of the Hebrew Bible. Canaan was the birthplace of patriarchs Jacob and Isaac. Together with the major powers of the ancient Near East, such as the Egyptian, Neo-Assyrian, and Babylonian empires, Canaan and later on the kingdoms of Israel and Judah were part of the bustling heart of early civilizations, where language, culture, and religion from all three continents meet. It's not surprising, then, that the waves of migration, trade, war, conquest, and intermarriage impacted this region in more ways than one. The ancient Israelites were traditionally considered to be Semitic people, sharing linguistic and cultural ties with other groups in the same area, including Canaanites, Moabites, Ammonites, Arameans, Phoenicians, Akkadians, and Arabs. Based on that, we can assume that ancient Israelites most likely still resemble people from the Middle East and the modern-day Jewish people. However, there are other factors that further complicate this matter. From the time of the patriarchs thousands of years ago to this day, the Jewish people have experienced constant dispersion and displacement. Starting with the fall of the ancient Kingdom of Israel to the hands of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Israelites were scattered, a pattern which would unfortunately repeat itself throughout history. This tragedy led to the loss of the 10 tribes, which to this day remain a big question mark in the history. The subsequent conquest of the Kingdom of Judah by the remains led to the Babylonian exile, which dispersed the Israelites even more. These early dispersions became the groundwork for a diaspora that would spread itself across the globe. History wasn't very kind to the Jewish population either. In 70 CE, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, which further dispersed the Jewish people, leading them to establish communities outside their promised land. From Middle East to Europe to North Africa, the Jews built their own communities. But even with that, they still faced expulsions, discrimination, and forced conversion, which sometimes even led to massacres by other groups. From Spain to Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Then there was the Holocaust. Not only did it diminish a large part of the Jewish population, but also displaced millions, with most settling in the New World to escape persecution. Despite these adversities, the Jewish people maintained their religious, cultural, and communal identity. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, many Jews were given the opportunity to settle in the country, provided that they had proof of their Jewish lineage. These centuries of dispersion and displacement led to the diverse backgrounds of Jewish communities. Nowadays, there are many different distinct Jewish groups. Some of the major ones are the Ashkenazi Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, Sephardic Jews of the Iberian Peninsula and Ottoman Empire, and the Mizrahi Jews of the Middle East and North Africa. So, why is the traditional depiction of ancient Israelites white? And why did they become white? There's no straight answer to this question. A combination of factors such as cultural, social, and artistic developments helped form the stereotype of white Jewish people nowadays. While it's true that many Jews today do have lighter complexions, they belong to communities like the Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. Keep in mind that Jews have a varied background and physical appearances, despite sharing many similarities. So, to answer the question of whether the ancient Israelites had a darker complexion, we can assume that they indeed have, given that they lived in an area known as the Levant, where inhabitants had olive to darker skin, adapted to the hot climate of the Fertile Crescent and the Mediterranean. It's only logical that ancient Israelites also had the same complexion. As you know, ancient representations depicting Israelites were rare, but their contemporaries, such as the ancient Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians, had a wealth of artworks that sometimes showed people from the Levant, including the Israelites as well. In these representations, Israelites were also depicted as having a darker skin color. Back to the question of why the ancient Israelites became white, it's perhaps better to reframe it this way. Why is it that our modern perception of ancient Israelites was white, instead of how they would have looked based on the evidence laid out above? Basically, it was the combination of artistic conventions and cultural influence, then subsequent historical depiction and media portrayal, that have cemented this stereotype in our minds. Colonialism and Eurocentric worldview further spread this distorted perception of what ancient Israelites looked like. The dispersion of Jewish people around the world also contributed to this confusion. Because the stereotype of white Israelites was so deep in our consciousness, it became quite a shock to many that the Jews had diverse communities with skin colors ranging from white to black. The question of what Israelites looked like is still subject to debate and further study. As time passed, we learned more about the ancient Israelites. We can trust that the more research was done into ancient Israel, the more we will know. Maybe at that time, the color of their skin would be irrelevant, say, compared to the vast influence they brought to the world. But who isn't curious, right? What do you think about it? Do you agree with the facts? What else can you share on the topic? Subscribe to the channel, and if you're thirsty for more knowledge, just play the video we offer on the left of your screen.